Thank you for joining, Aaron. Yeah, just to introduce you briefly, I know you do have the slides, and I would definitely love to dive into that topic as well. Aaron Wright, just to kind of brief about you, everybody on the call, is a professor at Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law, where you direct the Cardozo blockchain project and other technology programs, and you are also a founder of Open Law. This is pretty much how I found you. I'm a huge fan of open law, I must say. You guys are creating some really cool projects with smart contracts, and we are going to also have a demo presentation provided by Ross Campbell later. I think it's going to be the last day of our summit, so day 5 on Tuesday. It's going to be the same hour as today, so please join us for that as well. Aaron, please introduce yourself to us. I know that there is plenty more to be told, and do share the presentation with us. Thank you. Oh, and
I'm on mute. Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much for the warm welcome, Anja. It's really great to be here. So as Anja noted, I'm a professor at Cardozo Law School. I have a background in law and technology. Before joining Cardozo's faculty, I sold a company to the for-profit sister project to Wikipedia called Wikia. So I've done a lot with user-generated content and communities. Fell deep down the Bitcoin and blockchain rabbit hole starting in 2011, played a small role helping to launch Ethereum, which is the second largest blockchain. Have worked with a lot of other great teams over the years, and also had the pleasure of co-authoring a book that Harvard published on blockchain law and policy in 2018. And from that work, I have operationalized some of the research that I've done, building a project called Open Law, which is a Ricardian contracting system. So I've teed up a presentation. So let me just share my screen real quick, and then I can unpack Open Law a bit more and answer any questions that folks may have. So just give me one second.
And we're also having the lab for blockchain governance and crypto law every morning. I know it's not in your time zone, or at least not available for you, because it's happening at 9 a.m. Central European time, unfortunately, but it is going to be captured on recording, and it's going to be available to you as a replay, at least that. And we also had a conversation with Primavera just an hour ago. She's in a panel with space lawyers, and it's been quite amazing. I know that she co-authored that book that you mentioned with you.
Yeah, and Primavera is amazing. And, you know, since the topic of the summit is really future law, I'm deciding to fashion this in kind of the pushing things towards the future. And, you know, I think the core concept, and something that I think we need to think about, is really that over the next several decades, billions of contracts are likely to become smart. So they're going to get liberated from their paper format and digitized, and increasingly be able to interact with other computing systems that we have already. And, you know, why is that going to happen? I think we're starting to see the threads of it with blockchain technology and fintech and other kind of meta trends that are occurring right now. But in many ways, contracts are the dark matter of the commercial world. They exist everywhere. They exist in almost every industry. And for most people, they're completely inscrutable, just like dark matter is to physicists. So they're incredibly important. They're kind of the glue, the cartilage, the bridges that are created to enable commercial transactions to occur. But this notion of, you know, digital contracts is not new. It actually started in the Web 0 community, also known as the Zanimix community, which it was in California and other parts of the United States, starting in the you know, the late 1980s and early 1990s, where this community really outlined the structure, I think the core pieces of what we're all grappling with today. And we've really only grappled with kind of the first part of this future. And that first part is the internet, which was really this conception of hypertext. So the Zanimix ecosystem really thought about hypertext and building out the World Wide Web. We're still grappling with that today, but they also came up with about 5 other things that they envisioned this future world encompassing. One was a digital currency, and we're beginning to grapple with that today with things like Bitcoin and Ether and other natively digital assets. They also conceived the notion of a smart contract, which is fundamentally what Ethereum does. But these last 3, I think we're just in the beginning stages of seeing them emerge, which includes Ricardian contracts, which I'm going to unpack a bit, virtual goods, which I think we're beginning to see, particularly in the blockchain ecosystem. And last but not least, just market-based ways to make predictions. We have some early examples of that, but they're not really used in any wide in wide sense yet. And I think it's this kind of core 5 pieces, which ultimately will be the information revolution. And I think that this is the playbook that we're going to see play out over the next 20 years. And this notion of a smart contract, which fundamentally is this idea of being able to represent some sort of digital agreement in a computable way, it again is not a new concept. Folks like Nick Szabo, Ian Grigg, and Mark Miller were thinking about this 20+ years ago. And what we're seeing is that we're moving beyond this conceptualization phase right now into the building phase, where we have people like Vitalik Buterin and Sergey from Chainlink, and frankly, the team that I'm working with on the open law side that are trying to build out this vision, which folks like Nick Szabo, Ian Grigg, and Mark Miller began to think about 20+ years ago. And the reason that I think we're able to do this at this point in time is because now we have a core substrate, i.e. a blockchain, which actually enables us to achieve peer-to-peer contracting and peer-to-peer asset transfers in a secure way in which we can authenticate the underlying information related to it. And so when I think people think about this idea of a smart contract, they're actually thinking about 3 related concepts. One is an actual blockchain-based smart contract. The second one is a Ricardian contract, and the third one is a data feed. And it's these 3 pieces, these 3 pillars, that really represent, I think, the concept, or the kind of more common concept of a digital contract that's responsive to inputs and outputs, i.e. like a smart contract. And just kind of unpacking this in a little bit more detail, smart contracts, at least as they're conceived in a blockchain-based ecosystem, they do a couple of things. So they're not necessarily legal agreements, although they can be legal agreements. But what they do is they create digital assets. They're able to define rights and obligations related to those assets, and they can manage an assets movement. So the beautiful thing about a blockchain is that we've turned things of value into an informational good. So much the same way that the internet transformed written communications, video, audio communications, and other forms of media into information, and it can be zipped across the globe. It can be broken down into small bytes. It can be packaged up into large pieces. The same thing is now happening with blockchain technology. In a sense, Bitcoin showed us that value could be something as easy to transfer as an email. Maybe it wouldn't get delivered to you in a nanosecond or a fraction of a second like we have with email. It would get delivered to you in 12 minutes. But the seamlessness in which you can effectuate an asset transfer is profoundly different now using this technology than it has been at any other point in the future or in the past. And I think that that's profound. Ethereum basically added additional logic that enabled us to not just send something of value, but actually structure and define parameters around that. And that is equally profound, if not more profound, because it's the structuring and defining of rules, defining of rights, and being able to not just send it to one person, but a whole ecosystem of people potentially, that really is the core substrate of the commercial world. And that's the core substrate of things like property rights. It's the core substrate of things like markets. It's also the core substrate of different mechanisms as well. Oracles, which some folks may have heard about and or have thought about, really make smart contracts dynamic. And this is new, right? If we have a traditional legal agreement today, it is static. It really can't do much of anything. It can only record some agreement between parties. But oracles are notable because they turn relationships into more systemic and systematic in their nature. So we can turn a contractual relationship not from a memorization of an agreement between parties, but actually into a system to manage a commercial function. And that is a big shift, I think, in the way that we're used to thinking about how commercial relationships actually operate. And in many ways, and there's lots of legal theorists have talked about this, particularly in the context of relational contracts, that's in part what contracts do, right? They manage a system, a series of relationships between parties, but with smart contracts being able to move value, oracles being able to take out, outside information, impute them, change potentially the flow of value between parties. We're beginning to start to imagine contracts not just as these static objects, but more as commercial systems. The last piece, and this is the piece that we're focused on the most on the open law side, and this really draws on the work of great minds like Ian Grigg and others, is a Ricardian contract. And the idea here is that there's more to contracts than moving around value. And the lawyers that are here obviously know that, but many folks in the real world don't recognize that. They don't recognize the fact that contracts not only move around value, will structure value in different ways, but it also manages risk. It does things that are important so that if something goes wrong, there's ways for us to account for it. And so recording contracts kind of fill in those gaps. We're able now, through open law and through other recording and contracting systems, to represent all the core aspects of a contract in a way that a computer can understand it. So right now, many lawyers still can't understand lots of contracts, and definitely the public has a hard time with it. But computers and computing systems struggle, and I think will continue to struggle despite advances with artificial intelligence or other AI, machine learning, natural language process systems to understand what contracts are, because frankly, it's the most precise and arcane language that we have. And it's not a particularly large set of contracts that are able to train these types of systems. So we need to do a bit of structuring off the bat. And that's what recording contracts in a sense do. So on the front, they look exactly like a traditional contract, which you'd see today, but on the back and under the hood, it's completely formatted and structured in a way that it's understandable by a computing system. You can interact with it, you can push information to it, you can pull information to it, or pull information from it. And that's really useful, particularly as we build out this new commercial world to start to manage risks, which is a big issue, obviously, that lawyers are very familiar with. So our vision and what we think is coming over the next 5 to 10 years is that we're slowly kind of building up this stack. So we first got Ethereum about 6 years ago, where we were able to mint assets, apply rules related to it, and structure different forms of asset flows. We've seen robust Oracle solutions like Chainlink emerge, where we're able to authenticate data and port that into smart contracts. And then we kind of sit in the middle of all this, where we can begin to manage risk in more detailed and important ways. So things that may not be easily rendered into some sort of computable format, we can begin to make sure that that's at least identified and accounted for and can interact with all these different layers that are emerging. So this is my position, my belief, and I think there's growing consensus around this, but I think that this is the future commercial infrastructure. This is the stack that people will be building off of. This is the stack that's going to enable us to hopefully advance the commercial world away from where we are today. And I think that is incredibly optimistic. I don't think anybody looks at our current commercial infrastructure and thinks that it's entirely well functioning. It works pretty well, but it has lots of problems. And I think now we have the ability to begin to imagine a slightly better way to do this. And it's not just being explored by blockchain technology companies or folks in the nascent blockchain and Bitcoin ecosystems. This is also being explored by enterprises. So enterprises sit on troves of contracts today that they know nothing about. They have to manually input information related to them. They have a hard time managing them. They don't understand risks related to that. And we don't have to look any further than 2008 to see the dramatic impact that can have. The simple fact that large financial institutions, regulators, and other interested parties did not know the level and scope of various different derivatives and other products that were floating around the marketplace caused a financial meltdown that cost people tremendous amounts of value and hurt a number of people's lives. And we have the opportunity using this type of technology to begin to tackle those problems in a holistic way. And that's why we're super excited about it. We've been working with a bunch of different enterprises, including the LSTA, which is the Loan Syndications Trading Association, which manages the I think at about $500 billion plus syndicated loan marketplace. We've been working with organizations like ISDA to explore how this could impact the derivatives marketplace. We've also been working with other legal tech providers, including the folks at Rocket Lawyer, so that we can begin to deploy this technology into a greater range of hands and in a much more efficient way. The fun things that we've been working on the open law side is that you're now able to actually create and execute these smart contracts using legacy tools. So we rolled this out about a month or so ago, but you can generate a contract in open law. So you can basically play around and have some really robust document automation tools You can pull in outside information, including information from Chainlink oracles or third-party sources. You can save that entire package in Word. And then with a plugin, you can actually execute smart contracts now within Word, just using a simple plugin. So this is kind of the entire encapsulation, I think, of a direction in which this could go, whereby lawyers can, in the tools that they use today, i.e. Word, actually begin to generate, edit, and play around with lots of this new emerging technology without leaving the comfy confines of the Microsoft ecosystem. But here's where things get a little bit more interesting. Because we turn these contracts into a data object, you can really do whatever you want with them. So if you need to push them to other systems like Dropbox or OneDrive, or some of these emerging decentralized file systems we're seeing on Ethereum and other blockchains, completely available, right? It's not a proprietary docx file that is incredibly hard to parse and understand and interact with. Instead, it's an easy to use JSON file that can be converted into whatever format we want it to be. It can be popped into different systems for gleaning insights. It can be saved as a PDF and outputted as a PDF or a Word file. It really doesn't matter. And all the data that's underlying these agreements, including the smart contract data, we're able to pull and push into other systems. So that can include basic systems from the 80s like Excel or from the 2000s like Google Sheets, but it could also include databases or other data structures. We've also built a set of tools where you can build and program workflows related to it because it's really easy for us to keep track of everything that's going on in the creation process. It's also easy for us to trigger certain events because we're dealing with a computable object. And we've also kind of packaged this all in a framework so that people can build bridges to other systems if they want in the future. So because we've kind of nailed this idea of being able to take a contract and turn it into a computable object, we now have a lot of flexibility to basically interact with any other system that's out there. And I think that that's pretty interesting and pretty exciting. But on the Open Law team, we didn't really start this to really impact the legacy world. As wonderful as that is, we think that that's a thing of the past. So what we've been increasingly focused on is really the future of commerce. And I think the real threads of the future of commerce are in the blockchain ecosystem. And so this smart contract stack that I outlined before, which includes open law, is really beginning to bridge DeFi for the real world. And we've begun to implement these tools into existing crypto ecosystems so that these ecosystems can mature more rapidly. And our sense is that what will happen in the blockchain ecosystem is going to be self-referential for the next 5 to 10 years, i.e. we're going to see tools created for other crypto tools, and then the crypto ecosystem will get bigger, then more tools will get created, and then it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then eventually it's going to be so big that enterprises basically have to succumb to it. The reason I think that that's the case is because that's what happened with the internet. It's not like enterprises, legacy enterprises, were jumping at the bit to go online. Instead, the internet ecosystem was very self-referential for well over a decade before it became weighty enough and before we began to see new technology patterns emerge that made it worthwhile for more legacy institutions to play around with it. But what we've done in a couple instances, which may be worth exploring, is number one, we've worked with a great decentralized lending project called Aave, which is a way to basically get a loan in an entirely algorithmic way. So there's no gatekeepers. Instead, if you have enough collateral, you're able to basically take out a loan at a very low fee. So there's no bank administrator or other folks that are checking to make sure you're able to get the loan. Instead, regardless of your background, jurisdiction, race, creed, history, if you have enough collateral, you can get a loan. So it's completely neutral, which I think is completely interesting. So the way it worked right now with Aave, the loans are over collateralized, so you have to put up more money than you're able to get back. We've worked with them to start building under collateralized loans. So using traditional legal agreements, we're able to begin to manage risk, identify if things go wrong, what dispute resolution, et cetera, will occur, and begin to explore how we can have under collateralized loans in the blockchain ecosystem, not using things like credit scores, but instead using more evolved concepts like webs of trust. So we think that's super interesting. Another thing that we've been building and increasingly focused on is the DAO ecosystem, where we've taken our tools and we basically rebooted the initial DAO experiment in a project called Allow. We're pooling funds together and making investments, and all of the paperwork, both in onboarding a new person into the DAO and also settling some form of investment, it's all automated from end to end. So what does that mean? It means that we're able to actually have a whole group of people that don't necessarily know one another or didn't know one another before they joined the DAO, able to democratically decide where to deploy capital and have almost everything related to it automated, including the transfer of assets, including the generation of legal paperwork. And we've been able through this process to make about 30 investments into projects, and we're able to get teams' decisions in a matter of days as opposed to weeks or months. So moving away from kind of the more bureaucratic models that we've seen with other more traditional businesses. I think, again, this is just the beginning. This is the tip of the iceberg. And I think that this stack really matters. I think what we're seeing here is the threads of the real digitization of real world assets. My personal view is that over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and the time horizons are difficult, every single asset in the world will become digital. We're starting to see this already with intellectual property, where in the blockchain ecosystem, digital artwork is being created and secured and transferred onto a blockchain. And it's beginning to interact with all these other systems. So much like what we saw in the late 1990s and 2000s, when we saw books increasingly become digitized and turn into ebooks, I think we're starting to see artwork become digitized and turn into digital art. And in the future, I don't think you're going to see a piece of artwork that isn't digital. Just like if you haven't digitized a traditional book, it gets lost in the stacks and nobody cares about it because it's not able to interact with this amazing thing called the internet. If you're not going to digitize an asset in the future, it's not going to be able to interact with the future commercial stack, and it's going to become much, much less valuable. The second thing that the stack is doing is it's actually creating the funnel of value that we believe will grease the wheels of DeFi. So right now, there's plenty of digital assets, about $500 billion worth, but most of the world's assets are not digitized yet. And it's this stack, the smart contract stack, that actually will structure things and enable value to increasingly become digitized. I think that this stack is also a cornerstone of increasing adoption on Ethereum. I think Ethereum's core function is to actually manage the rights of these digital assets, and that's its core function. And that's primarily what it's going to be used for going forward, and therefore the stack is needed. And it also is going to create more and more demand for these Oracle data service providers, which is, I think, incredibly interesting. And at the end of the day, if we're right, and there's plenty of reasons to be skeptical, although as the months go on and as the years go on, I'm increasingly less skeptical. The beautiful thing about what we're building is that it's all on a permissionless, decentralized system. So there's no one intermediary that's stewarding this entire thing. Instead, it's freely available to everybody who has an internet connection. So everybody around the globe will have the ability to create digital assets, interact with digital assets, interact with marketplaces, interact with voting systems, interact with legal agreements in ways that we just don't have today. And I think that this will all end with a actual risk for traditional legal agreements. I increasingly think, particularly for highly commoditized and commercialized relationships, that we will see this stack emerge. Let me just jump forward. I think what we'll see is a smart contract or a commercial system that's entirely based in code that manages the core function of what happens. And you will see that managed by an ecosystem of people that will gap fill all the risks related to any shortcomings in that system that will be managed via DAO. And that DAO will have certain Ricardian contracting aspects to manage the relationships between the members. And I think it's this stack that we're ultimately building towards. And at the end of the day, I think it's going to really, and in particular, narrow the legal formalism that we live in today, where we have these written paper-based agreements that predominate the commercial landscape. I think in the future, we're going to instead have a smart contract-based systems for hyper commoditized relationships that are all encapsulated in a tradable token. And also that tradable token will give folks the ability to manage any risks related to it. We see some early examples of this, but I think that this is really the future. And I think that matters for lawyers because it means you're getting pushed to the edges. Your role and the need for your services may not be as relevant, not next year, maybe not in 5 years, but in 10 or 15 or 20 years. And I think, frankly, the world will be better off for it. I think we'll have clear ideas of how things work, more standardization that comes up organically from the bottom. And at the same time, at the top at least, we'll have the ability for a more traditional infrastructures or systems to interact with it. So we've come a long way over the past 6 years, in particular for the blockchain ecosystem. There's a heck of a lot more work to do, but I think it's coming along much faster and actually much better than many folks, particularly those that were there at the beginning, could have anticipated. So there's a lot to be excited to. And if you're a lawyer or you're interested in the future of the law, just know that it may look a bit different than what you're doing today. Even though you may be able to interact with these things in legacy tools like Microsoft Word, you have to know that in 20 years, that's not the way the world is going to look. And the reason that's the case is that we actually now have the tools to begin to help to manage these commercial relationships in much better, cleaner, more standardized ways. So thanks. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Plenty of them, but we only have 1 more minute to go. Not sure if that was intentionally or not. We do have a couple of questions. Magda is asking whether you are going to be digitalizing every single asset in the world, even in developing or evolving world. Yeah,
I mean, I think we're starting to, the first thread of it, and there's a movement inside of the blockchain ecosystem called NFTs. They're very interesting because it's the first asset, digital asset, that is not really a virtual currency or cryptocurrency. It really is supposed to represent like a unitary piece of property, digital property. And what we're seeing on platforms like Super Rare and Async Art and a whole host of other avenues is that this digital property is being created by creators around the world. Folks who are 17 and aspiring artists are creating it. Well-established artists are creating it. Well-established musicians are doing really interesting audiovisual experiments with it. We're seeing an entire ecosystem flourish on top of it. And then people are being paid for their work. And that is incredibly liberating. It gives folks that want to create scarce media, and there's plenty of folks that do want to create scarce media, the opportunity to make a living, the opportunity to express themselves creatively, regardless of where they live. And they're not beholden to tech giants like YouTube, who are going to take a 40% cut of everything that they do, which is kind of the default right now. So I think this is a glimmer of a future where content creators, artists, other folks that generate media will actually begin to be able to monetize their works in a way we're familiar with. They just were ways that people monetize their works before the age of the internet, right? People used to create scarce items and sell them. And that used to be a really nice way to support yourself as an artist. I think what's also interesting is that unlike that previous world, we're going to be able to also give those artists some ability to enjoy the upside if it increases in value. So you can actually break down this artwork into fractionalized pieces or shards. So one person can own it, but then you can have a whole bunch of other people own small pieces of it as well. And that can be really great for efficient pricing information. It can be really great so that people feel like they can hold and touch something that they want to be a part of. And I think that that's the direction it's going to go. So imagine a future state where the Mona Lisa has been digitized by the Louvre, and 10+ million people can own a piece of the Mona Lisa. I think not only would that be good for being able to bring the Mona Lisa into these digital worlds that are being created, but it also ensures its ongoing vitality, right? You have millions of people that can interact with it, they can touch it, they could see it whenever they want, or they can create these different experiences with it. So I think that's the threads, and then I think over time, we're just going to see more and more assets and more traditional assets begin to come online, like real property, et cetera. So just to sum up, I think intellectual property is first. It's an imagination, collective imagination that we've created. And so it's pretty easy to begin to quantify that in the blockchain ecosystem. And then I think harder physical assets will come a little bit later on down the line. But the playbook and the patterns that we see with this digital artwork or the IP ecosystems will be the beginning and kind of, I think, dictate how we see physical assets digitized in the future.
Aaron, that was one question that we were discussing with Magda previously, because we were addressing the digital currencies, and a question arose, and that was, what are the legal challenges that we are seeing? I mean, you're now talking about having the legal documents all in a digital form, but does the legal framework already allow for that? Is there enough support for that to actually be, proposed to the court as the evidence, or are there any stumbling blocks on the road?
So the answer is yes, at least in the US. In the US, in the late 1990s, sorry, I just need to tell somebody I'm going to be late. So in the late 1990s, we kind of foresaw that there'd be more digital contracting, and we passed a series of laws both at the federal and state levels called the UETA and the eSign Act that pretty much bless digital contracting and digital signatures really in any format they appear. And actually in those pieces of legislation, they envision the use of an electronic agent or an electronic third party that would be able to satisfy performance obligations on behalf of the contracting parties. If you think about what a blockchain network does, it is effectively that electronic agent. The parties are agreeing to deputize this network to satisfy performance obligation, i.e. transfer Bitcoin or Ether or some other form of value between one party and another, or one party and multiple parties. So in the US, I think we're in good shape. The US is also unique in the sense that it is very contract-based at its core. So there's a strong tradition in the US of private ordering, which is an academic term for basically enabling any party to contract if they want to contract. So there's not much restriction on private ordering. And we have member-managed organizations that are that have limited liability. So in effect, we already have recognized at least some forms of the DAO structures. I've been working with the state of Wyoming, which is one state in the US, along with others to begin to actually legitimize the creation of DAOs. I wouldn't be surprised if by this time next year in Wyoming, you would be able to actually set up a legally recognized DAO with legal liability and have it completely able to interact with the rest of the traditional world. So it's coming.
That's incredible. Yeah, it definitely is. And the future awaits with the DAO. I mean, it's incredible to hear all these developments. Thank you so much for sharing it. And yeah, with you, we are also going to be concluding the day one of the Future Law Virtual Summit. Thank you for joining, Magda, as well. And I mean, Michelle Zappa is no longer with us, but this has all been incredible. The sessions are going to be available to you as a replay as well. So be sure to keep an eye on this.